Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Joan Landis, and I am lucky enough to be on the education team here at Weeden Island Preserve. And I'm super excited to kick off another one of our special series, Why It Matters. This series is devoted to content about environmental issues, current events, and it also has a component piece for you, the individual, on how you can get involved with these topics and how you can make a difference. I'm super excited. Our fantastic speaker today is Tonya Wiley, who is president of Havenworth Coastal Conservation. She'll tell us more about the group that she founded. She's a marine biologist, she's a researcher, and just a super cool woman. So I'm super excited to have you guys get to know her a little bit. The way this format works on Why It Matters is that Tonya's going to tell us a little bit about her work and the results that she's finding about this super cool creature, the endangered sawfish. And a lot of the work has to do is being done right here in Tampa Bay, which makes it even more relatable for us. Okay, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to type them either into the chat, preferably into the Q&A. We don't really have a preference. You'll find either one of those boxes below. And what we'll do is save them, and I will serve them up to Tonya at the end of the presentation. Okay. After that part of the Q&A, what's kind of fun with Why It Matters is we really kind of get to do a deep dive on an informal basis with Tonya today. So I have a series of questions that I'm going to be asking Tonya, and she's going to be letting us know a little bit more about herself, her research, how she's gotten where she is today, and some cool stuff like that. So it is my pleasure and great honor to introduce to you today, Tonya Wiley. Tonya, it's all you.
Oh, thanks, Joan, so much for that. Thank you guys for joining me this afternoon to learn about the sawfish that we have here in the Tampa Bay area. It's kind of a gloomy day outside. So good day to spend on a webinar learning about one of the unique creatures we have swimming around in our waters out here. So as Joan mentioned, I formed my own company about 12 years ago, Havenworth Coastal Conservation. I've spent most of my professional life working on fisheries related issues from Oregon to Texas to Florida. Got to Florida by working at Mote Marine Lab on the Sawfish Project, and then went off on my own about 12 years ago. I now work on a variety of shark and ray projects in the Tampa Bay area. Have some projects on in the Manatee River and in Terracea Bay and Lower Tampa Bay. But of course, what we're here to talk about today is the sawfish research that I'm doing in the greater Tampa Bay area. So the first thing, of course, we need to figure out is what is a sawfish? What are we talking about this afternoon? So a sawfish is a very large, distinctive type of ray. And the easiest way that you can tell the difference between a shark and a ray is that sharks have their gill slits on the side of their bodies, and rays have their gill slits on the underside of their body. So if you think about a classic shark, it's got those gill slits that you see as it's swimming by. Rays like stingrays or cow-nosed rays and sawfish are going to have those gill slits on the underside of their body. So that makes them a ray. Easy to see how they get their name, right? They have this large extended rostrum, looks like a hedge trimmer. Most people call it a saw, so they're called sawfish. There's 5 species of sawfish found around the world, and here in the United States, we used to have 2 species of sawfish. And unfortunately, I do have to say that we used to have 2 species because we have already lost one. But at one time, both species were considered very abundant and common in the coastal waters throughout the United States. So that's what a sawfish is. Now we're going to review quickly what a sawfish is not. These are a lot of the things that people get confused with sawfish or send me pictures of that they've caught that they think is a sawfish. So on the left-hand side All of these are bony fish. They have skeletons made of bone, and they have one gill opening on the side. So swordfish, paddlefish, needlefish, and gar, they all have this, extended nose, rostrum sticking out the front of their head, but they have skeletons made of bone and the one gill opening. So these are not sawfish. Now, saw sharks look very similar to a sawfish, but it is a saw shark, and the gill slits are on the side of their body instead of on the underside of their body. And I hear sawtooth shark a lot. That is not a critter that exists in our waters. Sawtooth is actually a mountain range out in Idaho. So that clears up what we are here to talk about today. So I mentioned that we used to have two species of sawfish in the United States, and here they are side by side. On the left is small-tooth sawfish, Pristis pectinata. That one has 22 to 29 rostral teeth on either side of that saw or rostrum. The large-tooth sawfish, Pristis pristis, has 16 to 20. Now, these teeth on the saw are not actual teeth like in the mouth. These are actually modified scales, and they'll grow continuously throughout the life of the animal, just like our fingernails do. So they'll break them or they'll chip them as they're using their saw to find food, just like we break our fingernails, but they grow continuously throughout the life of the animal. The other unique thing is that the number of teeth that they're going to have on the saw is actually set during development. So in mom, the number of teeth that are forming on the saw is the number of teeth that they'll have their whole life. And they can vary by as much as 3 on the side of the teeth. So one sawfish might have 23 teeth on one side and 25 on the other. Another sawfish could have 25 on one side and 28 on the other. That's one way we can identify individuals. If we see them together or get photographs from the public, we can count the teeth and see if they're the same individuals that we're seeing. There's some other differences, of course, here with the shape of the pectoral fins. This one is really narrow and rounded, where on the large tooth it's wide and pointed, and some differences in the positioning of the fins. But by far the easiest way to tell them apart was by the number of teeth on the saw. So when we look historically at where these two species were found, again, the small-tooth sawfish is on the left and the large-tooth sawfish is on the right. In red is depicted where the species historically were found. So in the United States here, you can see for the small-tooth sawfish, we had this one all throughout the Gulf of Mexico, from Texas over here to Florida, and up the Atlantic coast as far as North Carolina. We even have some sawfish that were reported in New York, landed in New York. We don't know where those animals were caught, but so we can consider the range, up to about North Carolina. The small-tooth sawfish was always more common east of the Mississippi River, so we had many more reports of this species from Florida, Georgia area. The large-tooth sawfish, on the other hand, was only found in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States here. And this one was always more common west of the Mississippi River, so most of the records of this species were from Texas. So when we started the project 22 years ago, the first thing we did was look at historic records of where sawfish were found. There actually wasn't public scientific literature on them when we started. So we went to the library, and this was before the internet. So we were actually in the library looking up old magazines and newspapers and captain's logs books and things like that. And so I wanted to show you guys some of these really cool old photographs that we have from the Tampa Bay area that show just how common sawfish used to be and how large they were, and some of the areas where we were seeing them. So here's one from the original iteration of the St. Petersburg Pier. So this was the Orange Belt Railway that was completed in 1889. And here's a sawfish laying across that original railroad pier in 1898, downtown St. Petersburg. Here's a really old newspaper clipping of a sawfish from St. Petersburg, 14 feet 6 inches. And here, just for perspective, here is how tall the fisherman is. Here's the tail of the sawfish, and the tip of the saw is all the way up here. So beautiful old historic photograph here. Here's another, this was a postcard of two sawfish landed on one of the beaches near St. Petersburg. This was from the early 1910s. Neat to see so much mangrove in the background. We don't really see that much anymore. And right down by me in Palmetto, here is a couple photographs of a sawfish that was landed in the Manatee River back in 1931 at what now is River House Restaurant. And so we have a lot of these photographs really all throughout Florida. Naples Pier is an area where historically we had a lot of photographs. And even today we get a lot of reports of people catching really large sawfish at the Naples Pier. You can go on YouTube and search for Naples Pier sawfish, and you can see videos of people just catching, massive full mature size sawfish down there. But here's a really cool picture that shows this. Again, here's a fisherman standing up here. Here's where the sawfish starts, and it goes all the way up here. And there's 4 sawfish hanging here in this photograph. And here's a tarpon that I'm sure is a pretty good sized tarpon because they kept it, they hung it up, they included it in the picture, but it just looks tiny, kind of looks like a finger mullet here compared to all these large sawfish that are hanging up. I would point out there's also a few spotted eagle rays down here. So in one day they were able to go out and catch this many sawfish down in Naples, which is quite amazing. If we go over to the other coast, Indian River Lagoon is an area that we know historically was very important for sawfish. Here's a picture of a sawfish hanging in a tree. You can't even see most of it. The tail isn't included in the photograph. Most of the saw is not even in the photograph. And here's an old book from 1988 that shows spearfishing for sawfish in the Indian River Lagoon, or harpooning for sawfish as a sport in the Indian River Lagoon. Here's a photograph from Key West. So, now we go down to the Keys and we can go into any of these shell world or souvenir shops and buy shell magnets or all kinds of things as a souvenir from our trip to the Keys. Well, people used to buy sawfish rostrum as a souvenir of their trip. And here's a little kid selling sawfish saws to tourists down in Key West back in the day. These 2 photographs, when we found these, were kind of big scientific, from a scientific nerd point of view. So we found this old postcard that showed this adult sawfish here. This is probably down in the Everglades, and it showed these 2 little fully formed baby sawfish here. So that was really the first thing that we saw that proof that they are giving birth to these fully formed live young. And then here's an old photograph from 1912 over in Melbourne. And again, the sawfish is so big that the rostrum's not even in the photograph up here, but there's 11 baby sawfish hanging in the tree and off this rope on this mother. So either they had cut these babies out of her or she dropped them in the stress of being cut. But this was really the first evidence that we had of how many young a mother sawfish can have. So a lot of information from just this one photograph that we were able to dig up in the archives. So this photograph on the left here kind of summarizes everything about sawfish in the United States in one picture, really. So this is from the 1940s in the Florida Keys, and these very well-dressed fishermen here in their 3-piece wool suits on this side of the boat alone kept 30 sawfish. Here's the largest one here on the side of the boat, and then there's several newborn size sawfish here. So we don't know what was on the other side of the boat or in the boat or what they had already removed, but we know in one day these guys were able to go out and catch that many sawfish. So we know that's how common they were, that they could go out and catch that many sawfish. But we know they also kept at least 30 sawfish in one day. So kind of shows now why they're endangered, that these many were kept in one day, just this one boat. On the right is our Florida state record sawfish. This one was caught in Florida Bay, what's now Flamingo and Everglades National Park in 1961. So those of you who are fishermen know that records are done by weight. So although we have some photographs of longer sawfish, this one was actually put on a boat trailer and trucked over to town to be officially weighed. And so 648 pounds is our official Florida state record sawfish. So we go back to the large tooth sawfish. That's the one that we only had in the Gulf of Mexico and that was much more common west of the Mississippi River. When we look at that one globally, at the distribution of that one around the world, the yellow is where this sawfish is now found, and that's really over here in Australia and a little bit down here in South America. We are up here in red, which is the possibly extinct category, unfortunately. So when we zoom in on our part here in the United States, for the large tooth sawfish, we know from photographs and records that this species was very common in the early 1900s. We have tons of these photographs from Texas as well, Louisiana, to show. Here's an example from a newspaper from Galveston, Texas, of two sawfish that one gentleman caught in a day. But we know by the 1950s, this species was already severely depleted, and we weren't seeing them show up as much in newspapers and magazines and in log books of fishermen and things like that. The last record we have of the large tooth sawfish in Florida was in 1943. So long time since we've seen that species here. And the last record in all of the United States was in Texas in 1961. So it's been 60 years since we've had this species documented at all in the United States. So unfortunately, we can consider this species to be locally extinct here in the United States. Now, when we look at the small tooth sawfish worldwide distribution, you can see this species is only found in the Atlantic Basin. We didn't have it over here in Australia. They have 4 of the 5 species in Australia, but not this species. So this one was restricted here to the Atlantic Basin. And, not very much orange, which means where the species is currently found on this map anymore, except our little glowing spot here in Florida. And so when we zoom in and look at our little piece of this map here in Florida for the small tooth sawfish, each dot on this map represents one of those photographs or newspaper articles or a document in a logbook of where someone caught or saw sawfish. And these records go all the way back to the late 1700s. We had 3,500 records that we were able to find through deep diving in the library when we started this project in 2000. So we mapped all of these records, and you can see they go here from Brownsville, Texas, through the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida. Here's that one that I said was landed in New York. We don't know where it was caught, but it was brought to shore there. So that's where we put the dot. But what I want to point out is this red zone here. So this red is where half of those records are. So almost 3,500 records, but half of those are from Tampa Bay here, down through the Keys and up to like Miami. That's historically when we go all the way back to 1782. Now we're going to fast forward, and we're only looking at records from 1964 to 2000. So we know now we've already lost the large tooth sawfish because we haven't had that one documented since the 50s. And you can see we've largely lost the small tooth sawfish over here from Texas now. There's just a little bit hanging on over here in the upper Laguna Madre, and kind of hanging on in the northern Gulf here. And we've completely lost them from the Atlantic seaboard north of Florida. The records are confined mainly now to peninsular Florida. And you can see that this red zone has contracted. So half of these records are still in Southwest Florida, but now Tampa Bay is no longer in that red area. Now this is really Charlotte Harbor and down through like Key Biscayne. And then we fast forward again, and now we're only looking at records from 1990 on. We no longer have sawfish in the Atlantic. We no longer have sawfish over here in the western Gulf of Mexico. All the records are now confined to Florida, and this red dot has shrunk again, where now this is mainly the 10,000 Islands, Everglades National Park, and the Florida Keys, where we were getting the reports of sawfish back then. So dramatic decline in this species as documented through those historic archive photographs and logbook records that we were able to find. So how is it possible that we have totally lost one of these majestic animals and the other one is now critically endangered and at risk of going extinct? And these are the 3 main reasons. Fishing mortality. I showed you all those pictures of people hanging up the sawfish for the photograph. They were a great sport fish, people going out and doing the harpooning with them. But once humans started mass fishing with nets, whether that be shrimp trawls or gill nets or even cast nets, sawfish are so easily entangled in a net because of that toothed rostrum. And the net are the fisherman's livelihood. So they weren't going to cut the net to get the sawfish out of the net. They were going to kill the sawfish and or cut the rostrum off, to save their net from the animals. So for decades, any sawfish that was encountered by a fisherman was killed either for a trophy or to save the net. Loss of inshore habitat. This goes for so many different species. We've developed a lot of our coastline. We've ripped out mangroves and we've built seawalls or marinas and beaches. And I'm going to go into detail later why that's why certain habitats are very important for sawfish. But they also have low reproductive capacity. And so I showed you that one photograph of the mama sawfish hanging in the tree with the 11 babies. When you compare that to like a trout or a redfish or a snook or some of the species that will spawn thousands or millions of eggs, the sawfish give live birth to very few young, about a dozen young, and that's probably every other year. So that one photograph from the Keys where they had 30 sawfish on the side of that boat, that would take one mother sawfish 3 years to replenish. So we withdrew the sawfish bank account much quicker than they were able to repopulate that population, unfortunately. And there were a lot of uses for sawfish and sawfish parts. One of them that continues today is shark fin soup. You may have heard about this being a problem for sharks. Well, it's also a very big problem for sawfish. So their fins are very highly prized for shark fin soup because they're considered, the meat is considered white fin. And so they're very sought after for shark fin soup. Here's an example of a tail fin of a sawfish, the caudal fin that was confiscated in trade in Indonesia, that it was on its way to the shark fin soup market along with a couple saws. People would keep the saws as trophies of their catch. So all those sawfish that were caught and hung up for the photographs, a lot of times the fishermen would cut the saw off and keep that as a trophy, to hang on their wall for their catch. And people were buying them as I mentioned, souvenirs for their trips around to different places. The saws were also sold in pharmacies. They were ground up to make the base for medicines, the powder for medicines. And live sawfish were traded for aquarium displays. A lot of those sawfish went through the Keys. They were collected in the Keys and then shipped out around the country and the world. And now there are about a dozen facilities in the US where you can go to see a sawfish. The closest to us is going to be SeaWorld in Orlando, where they have a couple sawfish there that they've had since the 80s. And so these are the facilities around the country where if you are ever lucky enough to be able to go see one, I highly recommend it because they're just amazing creatures to be able to see. Some other peculiar uses and continuing threats to sawfish are ceremonial weapons. So their rostrum are decorated and handles affixed to them for ceremonies. And one of the big problems is the cockfighting industry down in Central and South America. So they take the teeth off the sawfish rostrum and they affix these little metal devices to them to attach them to the legs of the roosters for spurs in the cockfighting industry. There have been several organizations that are trying to develop an artificial material for this or 3D print something. But the cockfighting industry likes this natural material. It's part of the culture. And so as of yet, this is still a big problem for sawfish, is the cockfighting industry and the use of their rostral teeth as spurs in cockfighting. Historically, their skin was used to make leather, for wallets and boots. In some places, their meat was used for consumption. Some places it was used for bait for fishing. And historically, the oil in their liver was used to light lamps. So in response to that decline, it largely happened unnoticed. I mentioned that there wasn't research going on sawfish before we started in 2000. But the state of Florida was actually very proactive, and in 1992, they protected both species of sawfish from harvest in Florida, making them catch and release only. In 1995, Florida instituted the inshore gill net ban, which passed in the 1994 election. And I put that in as an asterisk because it wasn't done for sawfish, didn't really have anything to do with sawfish. But that inshore gill net ban removed one of the major sources of mortality that we had for sawfish here in Florida. So it's really critically important that we keep that inshore gill net ban, even though it wasn't instituted for sawfish. In 1999, NOAA Fisheries, who's in charge of the Endangered Species Act for marine animals, received a petition to list both species of sawfish as endangered species. And that's when I came on. I was working for Texas Parks and Wildlife at the time, got the opportunity to come over to Florida to work on sawfish. And that's when we started that status review. I spent a lot of time in the library digging up all those records, making those maps. And we concluded in 2000, we finished that status review and concluded that we don't have large tooth sawfish anymore, and that the small tooth sawfish is in desperate need of protection under the Endangered Species Act. And so in 2003, the small tooth sawfish was listed as an endangered species on our Endangered Species Act. We spent the next several years developing a recovery plan that lays out everything that we need to do to save the sawfish that are left, but ultimately recover them. That's our goal. You know, we don't want sawfish to be on the Endangered Species Act forever. We want them to recover. We want them to be back outside of Florida again, repopulate some of these areas. And so that's our ultimate goal. And the recovery plan lays out what we need to do for that to happen. And as you can imagine, you know, the main thing is just that sawfish need to survive an interaction with us. You know, they if they're caught, they need to be handled and released properly so that they can survive that interaction. In 2013, sawfish, all 5 species of sawfish got protection on what's called CITES, and this stands for the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. And CITES restricts or bans the sale of parts of endangered species from one country to another. And so we were really hoping that this was going to help, especially with the cockfighting industry, and eliminating some of the pressure of sawfish being caught in some of these countries and shipped down there for the cockfighting industry. I think unfortunately it's driven a lot of that underground and onto the black market, but there are a lot of great organizations that are working to try to develop solutions to this and eliminate one of those major threats to sawfish recovery. In 2014, we went ahead and listed the large tooth sawfish as an endangered species. So although we haven't had it here for several decades, in case one is out there in the Gulf of Mexico or comes up here from Central or South America, it will be protected. So both species of sawfish are protected by Florida state law, and they're protected federally by the Endangered Species Act listing. In 2009, we also designated critical habitat for small tooth sawfish. That's what I mentioned earlier with the loss of inshore nursery habitat. So designating critical habitat doesn't create a closed area or a refuge somewhere where you can't go or can't fish or can't recreate. But what it does is ensure that any projects that are permitted or funded by the federal government in a certain area have to be reviewed to make sure they're not killing sawfish or that they're not adversely modifying the habitat that's important for sawfish to recover. So we had to figure out where small tooth sawfish were being born and where we were seeing them regularly. And that is south of us, but in Charlotte Harbor, that's the northern area where they get sawfish year round. They get sawfish born there every year. And then also the 10,000 Islands in Everglades National Park. Both of these areas provide this important nursery habitat, just like humans have nurseries where we put our babies for protections. Sharks and rays do the same thing. They don't have any maternal care, so the sharks will drop the baby sharks and baby sawfish in an area, and now they have to fend for their own. But that's why it's key that they have a habitat that's appropriate for them to be able to survive. And that nursery area provides them protection from predators and also provides them a lot of food so that they can grow up. And here's an example of why nursery habitat is so important. Here is a baby sawfish in the mouth of a bull shark that a fisherman caught down in Everglades National Park. So then we knew where sawfish were being born. Now we had to figure out what the features were. What are the habitat features that make that important for sawfish, that require us to manage appropriately in these areas? And so what we found was that the three features that are key for a sawfish nursery are a euryhaline environment, which is just a fancy scientific term for where freshwater and saltwater meet. So this is like Tampa Bay. All of Tampa Bay is euryhaline. It's where the tidal waters from the Gulf of Mexico come in and meet with the fresh waters running out from Hillsborough River and Manatee River and Little Manatee and Alafaya. It's where the full strength seawater meets the freshwater. So it's that brackish area in the estuary that these juvenile sawfish like. And they're often in waters less than 1 meter deep. And honestly, they're often in like ankle deep water. So here's my colleague Bo holding a juvenile sawfish down in Everglades National Park. There's another sawfish back here. And you can just see how very shallow water that these baby sawfish are in. This one is about a year old. And also red mangrove shorelines. They really like this red mangrove shoreline. And of course, as I mentioned, we've developed a lot of that in Florida. We've ripped out the mangrove shoreline. We've built seawalls or beaches or marinas and condos. So we've taken away a lot of that nursery habitat that those young sawfish need to survive to become adults and repopulate the population. So next I have a really cool drone video that was taken in the 10,000 Islands National Park. Here is a baby sawfish right here. And this video perfectly exemplifies why sawfish need this habitat. So you can see here, it's about a medium tide. So the sawfish is swimming around down here in just a few inches of water. And as that tide rises, these sawfish will actually go up and they'll sit in and amongst these red mangrove properties. So down here in deeper water are the sharks that are swimming by, gators that are swimming by, things that would be more than happy to have a little baby sawfish as a meal. So they'll stay in shallow water where these sharks can't swim. And then at a high tide, they'll actually go and seek refuge among these red mangrove properties. So I'm going to play this and let you just watch this video for a minute. And I know I'm biased, but they are just so cute. They're so cute when they're this size. So you can see here how shallow they are. The dorsal fin is wobbly. It's staying under the water, not even breaking the surface of the water. This guy's probably in 4 inches of water at the most. Just kind of waiting for that tide to go in so they can go up in the mangroves. Great shot here of two sawfish waiting for that tide to come up. So, if you're ever fishing, especially along the east wall here of Tampa Bay, around the port and, up to Apollo Beach where we have this kind of habitat, or around Emerson Point Preserve, those are the areas where we have some of this similar habitat up here in this area. And you can see from that video why that habitat is so important for them and why we've protected it. So these are the organizations and where they're working on small-tooth sawfish. When I started at Mote in 2000, we were the only ones doing the field work. Luckily, we've had a lot of partners come in now. So this is me up here in the greater Tampa Bay area. FWC, the state organization, is working on the sawfish in the Charlotte Harbor area. This is, as I mentioned, the area where we get sawfish year-round, the northernmost area where we get sawfish year-round and where we get newborn sawfish every year. And this population, because FWC lives here and works here on this in this area of Charlotte Harbor, this is one of the most well-studied groups of sawfishes in the world here in Charlotte Harbor. We're very lucky. Up here in Tampa Bay, we're kind of at the northern extent of their range right now. But we're starting to see sawfish up here, so this is great news for us. NOAA Fisheries is working on the juveniles down in Everglades National Park and the 10,000 Islands. Florida State University Coastal Marine Lab is working on the adults for us in Florida Bay, in the Keys, and starting to move up the Atlantic coast as we're starting to get some more records of sawfish up this other area. We have a number of partners who are doing shark research on the Atlantic coast that have encountered some sawfish, and they're able to tag some sawfish for us. So a lot of us around the state now working on sawfish, thankfully. This is my boat. You may see me out in Tampa Bay working on the shark projects that I work on and the sawfish projects. So we use bottom set long line with about 100 hooks to catch our big sawfish. Here we are just off Egmont. Here's us doing some shark research in Teresita Bay. But here we are setting a gill net in the creeks on the east wall of Tampa Bay, trying to find a sawfish by Cockroach Bay. Didn't catch any that day, but these are the variety of tools that we use to catch sawfish when we're out there in the field. When we do catch a sawfish, of course, we are ecstatic that we caught a sawfish. We caught an endangered species. It is like looking for a needle in a haystack still, but we take a lot of measurements from them. So we measure the length of the saw compared to the overall length of the body. And for the small tooth sawfish here in the United States, that rostrum is about 20 to 25% of the overall length of the body. It's usually right around 23%. So if we have an isolated saw that someone kept, we can measure that and then extrapolate out what the overall size of the animal was. Then we determine what sex it is. So all sharks and rays, unlike a bony fish, on sharks and rays, you can look externally to know if they're male or female. So male sharks and rays have two organs called claspers that they use for mating, so we can determine if they're male or female. We put a variety of tags on them to identify them, to track them, from the little pit tag, which is just like the microchip that you put in your pet, to these satellite tracking tags and identifier tags. We count the teeth on the rostrum left and right. As I mentioned, in the US, our small tooth sawfish have 22 to 29 on either side. Of course, we take a lot of samples. And I'm going to go back to tags here for a minute and focus on these transmitters, because this is one of our newest technologies for sawfish that's really paying off big. And you can best think about this like the sun path, the little white transponder box that you have in your car when you drive over the Skyway Bridge and go through the sun path toll lane. That's the same technology that we're using to track sawfish and sharks and fish and all kinds of things in Tampa Bay. So we implant these transmitters in the body cavity of the sawfish or the shark, and we have moored around the bay these acoustic listening, these monitoring stations. And anytime that a sawfish or any tagged animal swims in Tampa Bay, we have about a 400 meter or about a quarter-mile detection range. So anytime any animal with a transmitter in it swims within a quarter-mile of one of our receivers, that receiver, just like you driving through the sun pass toll lane, is going to record the date and the time and the transponder number of that animal. And then we have these networks. iTag is a network in the Gulf of Mexico that we use. FACT is a network on the Atlantic coast. And Ocean Tracking Network is a global network where people share these data. Because, of course, my sawfish don't stay just on my receivers, and I hear other people's animals on my receivers. So we have these online databases where we can upload our data from our receivers so other researchers can get their data. And then when other researchers upload data of one of my sawfish, the system will email me those data. So it's an amazing collaborative network of scientists around the state, around the country, and around the world that are collaborating using this instrumentation. And here in Tampa Bay, here is a map of all of our receiver locations that we have. We just went out last week and downloaded these. So my sawfish receivers are here in red. The white ones are FWC's receivers. The yellow ones here are New College receivers in Teresita Bay, working on the black tip shark nursery there in Teresita Bay. These purpley pink ones here in the Manatee River is a project that I have in collaboration with New College, where we are inventorying the shark and ray species in the Manatee River and getting an idea of the seasonal habitat use patterns of all the different species in the Manatee River. And then the Sarasota network, which goes all the way down through Sarasota Bay, is a collaborative project with New College, Mote Marine Laboratory, and the Sarasota Dolphin Research Project. So you can see here we have lower Tampa Bay pretty much covered. So nothing can, and these receivers go offshore a couple miles. also. So nothing can get in, and here's the Skyway Bridge. Nothing can get in through the Skyway without us detecting it. So that's really cool. And then I put these sawfish receivers up here into some of the areas where we get reports of sawfish up here to detect when they're coming in. So eventually, hopefully, with all the people working on different things, we'll have the Tampa Bay completely filled in. But for now, we're very happy that we have lower Tampa Bay, complete listening coverage of lower Tampa Bay. Let's skip this for a second. So our recovery implementation team was formed to take that recovery plan that we developed and implement it, to put it into action. So here's me, here's our team at a billboard we had down in the Keys. Our website is sawfishrecovery.org. But these are the folks who are tasked with, as I mentioned, saving the sawfish that are left and ultimately recovering them. So these are those of us who are doing research, management, and habitat protection for sawfish here in the United States. A lot of partners who are doing policy, outreach, conservation work for sawfish. The Sawfish Conservation Society is connecting the world to advance global sawfish education, research, and conservation. I mentioned there's 5 species of sawfish around the world. All of them are critically endangered. The populations are doing best here in Florida, which is sad that we're one of the better populations since we've already lost the species. And Australia is doing very good at protecting their species as well. One of the programs of the Sawfish Conservation Society is the CSAW project, where we can actually get DNA from any of these isolated rostra. So if you ever see one of these at your friend's house, you go to play poker or go to book club and you see a sawfish rostrum hanging on the wall, we can send them a kit for them to take a scraping out of this saw so we can get genetic material for that. So if you've ever swabbed your cheek and sent it off to 23andMe or Ancestry.com to get your family tree, your genetic history, our colleague Kevin Feldheim at the Field Museum in Chicago is doing that for us for sawfish. He's building this full family tree of sawfish for us in the United States, which will help us get to a lot of our management questions. You know, how many populations were there out there, and a lot of different questions like that that'll help us manage the population. So what we've learned about sawfish in the last 20 years, we know they're born about 2 feet long, fully formed little baby sawfish, and it takes them about 7 years before they actually start reaching sexually maturity, and that's about 11 or 12 feet long. So these are large animals before they even start to reproduce, and their maximum size now is about 16 feet. We don't know how long they live. We don't know how many are out there. Some of our major questions we still have to answer. We know they're pregnant about a year and they give birth to about 14 of these live little baby sawfish. And nature has found a way for mom to hold 14 baby sawfish in her and not get ripped to shreds by the saw and not get ripped during birth. And these teeth on the rostrum are covered in what we call the sheath. It's this thick gelatinous substance that covers these teeth on the saw to protect the babies from each other and to protect mom during birth. And they use that saw for hunting and manipulating food, for finding their prey, which is they feed mostly on fish. And here's a great video of a sawfish using his saw. So the first thing you're going to see is him using that saw to swipe at a fish in the water column, and just how quickly they can swipe that saw. And then you're going to see him use that saw to pin down a fish on the bottom and then go suck it up with his mouth. So I'm going to play this for you a couple times here. Just fascinating how quickly that they're able to move that saw, that extension. But they use that to find their food. So it's very important that fishermen don't remove that saw to keep it as a trophy, because that's what the sawfish needs to be able to detect the food and handle it to get it to its mouth. So our priorities now are law enforcement. Because of the ESA protections, it's illegal to target, harm, harass, handle sawfish in any way. But we know it still happens. We we've seen sawfish that are at a fish cleaning station. Someone kept the sawfish to eat it. Here, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office here in Tampa Bay boarded a shrimp trawl just to do a routine safety inspection and found a sawfish rostrum under one of the mattresses. They admitted that they had been down in the Keys shrimping and caught a sawfish and kept this as a trophy. Similarly, a shrimper off Jacksonville was sentenced for killing an endangered sawfish a couple years ago. So we know it's still a problem. So we designated critical habitat for juveniles, but we don't know if there's anywhere that we need to protect for adults. There may be not. We don't know if they all congregate somewhere to mate or if they just happen to mate when they pass each other. We don't know if there are areas where they all go to feed or if there are important corridors during migration. So through the tracking that we're doing with those transmitters and receivers, we're going to be able to get a lot of this information to see if there's areas that we need to protect for adults. So we're doing a lot of outreach and education to try to minimize those human threats. As I mentioned, the key thing that we can do to save sawfish is making sure that they survive that interaction with humans, which unfortunately does not happen a lot of the time. They're mishandled by anglers. They're drug up on shore, they're sat on for pictures, they're held out of the water, they're disturbed by divers. So we have a lot of materials that if we were meeting in person, I would be distributing to you, or that I can mail you if you want some materials. I'm happy to mail you some materials. But we're developing outreach materials to educate anglers and divers on how to appropriately interact with sawfish. So we have stickers and cards and tackle box cards with handling and release guidelines, which is basically leave the sawfish in the water, especially the gill, so that sawfish can continue to breathe. Just cut the line as close to the hook as possible. You don't want to be on the receiving end of that saw thrashing around, so just cut the line, the hook will rust out eventually. Leave the saw on the sawfish. And we know from our research that the sawfish are pretty hardy. If they're handled appropriately, they can survive that interaction. Similarly, for divers, if a sawfish changes his behavior or swims away because of your presence, then you've gotten too close to it. So just admire them from afar. There's areas where multiple sawfish are being spotted. We don't yet understand what they're doing there, if they're there to mate, if they're there to rest after giving birth, if they're there to feed, if they're resting during a migration. But if they're there, it's important for them to be there, and we don't want to disrupt their natural behavior by disturbing them. So just keeping your distance. Don't try to ride them, don't try to feed them, but definitely enjoy seeing them for sure. So you may start seeing signs and brochures around Tampa Bay. We're hanging these up at fishing piers and boat ramps and marinas and putting these rack cards in places that have these angler guidance and diver guidance on here of how to interact with a sawfish when you are lucky enough to see one. So you may see these rack cards again, or if you know anywhere that would like to have these rack cards to put in these displays, or we have plastic tabletop displays that we can give you for them as well. And then, of course, we ask everybody to let us know if you see or catch a sawfish. If you are lucky enough to see or catch one of these endangered species, we would love to know about it. It helps us monitor the population and see when the species is returning to some of these areas. The observational effort of everybody out on the water greatly increases our scientific knowledge with the information that we're able to get from anglers and divers and boaters, and even just people walking on piers that sometimes can look down and see them. So you can go on our website, sawfishrecovery.org, to submit a form. You can call our toll-free number. We have an email, or you can even submit it through the FWC Reporter app, and we'll get that information. And so here's what we've gotten in Tampa Bay. These are from the last 5 years. We have 32 sawfish that are either reported by someone from the public or that we detected on one of our receivers. And you can see we have a pretty good distribution throughout Tampa Bay here of where we are seeing sawfish. Even, yes, this one down here in downtown Tampa Bay, right by the Straz Theater, someone caught one down there in the Hillsborough River. A lot of them offshore on the beaches here. These are large sawfish that a lot of tarpon fishermen catch. And then these are like large juveniles that are 6 to 8 feet. A lot of the people are seeing over here on the east wall here. So thank you for everybody who reports their sawfish to us. It really helps. I live here in Terracea Bay, so if I get a report that someone is up here, at Apollo Beach and sees a sawfish, I'm going to get on my boat and head up there and try to find it and tag it. And that is exactly what happened this spring. These two records on this map are thanks to somebody calling us in and saying, I am looking at a baby sawfish on the beach here at Reddington Shores. We responded and we found 2 baby sawfish on the beach at Reddington, Indian Rocks area. And these were the first animals we were able to tag, get genetic samples from, and do everything in Tampa Bay. So huge thank you to everyone who called us in that was seeing those baby sawfish. And it really, really does help us with our research to get that information. So in conclusion, the large tooth sawfish is unfortunately locally extinct. We haven't had that one for several decades. The small tooth sawfish, we actually do expect that one to recover. We are optimistic that we can get that population to spread back out of South Florida and get reestablished in some of the areas where they used to be. The population is managed as a whole, as one unit. So, it can't recover just in the Everglades. It has to be fully recovered, but can't be regionally recovered. So it's important that protections stay in place in everywhere that we have sawfish until the entire population is recovered. But we are starting to see some encouraging signs of this population. One is that we're getting them up here in Tampa Bay again, which is great news. And that's largely due to that net ban that was done in the 90s, not for sawfish, but eliminated that major source of mortality for sawfish. And Everglades National Park, which in Southwest Florida is this huge expanse of natural habitat and limited fishing pressure. So we need both of those to stay in place in order for us to save sawfish. There's a lot of research being done on sawfish now. Just in the last 20 years, we've learned leaps and bounds our knowledge about sawfish, and more people are becoming aware, thanks to you guys coming to things like this. A lot more people are becoming aware that we have sawfish and now know what to do if they are lucky enough to encounter one. So I'm going to leave you with some fun slides here. These are sawfish rostrum that you're going to see in pop culture, and I promise you now you're going to watch a movie or a TV show and you're going to see a sawfish rostrum in the background, because they're kind of everywhere in movies and TV shows now. Pirates of the Caribbean, they were using sawfish rostrum as weapons, as I mentioned. It is one of the things. Even Point Break, they had a sawfish rostrum in their party house. My husband was watching this show just recently, actually during lockdown, and saw a sawfish rostrum in Silicon Valley. And even my favorite movie that inspired me to become a marine biologist, what I think is the greatest movie ever filmed, Jaws, Quint actually had one of each species of sawfish rostrum in his cabin. He's got a large tooth sawfish rostrum here and a small tooth sawfish rostrum here. So I promise you're probably going to see one now watching something. But so of course I have to thank everybody who funds my research, who funds my outreach events that I normally do and will continue to do when we're able to go back out in public again. So thanks to everyone who's contributed to our project. If you want to help either our research efforts or our outreach efforts, you can make a tax-deductible donation at havenworth.wedid.it, and that'll go directly into Tampa Bay research and outreach projects that we have going on here for sawfish. So I'm going to leave you here with all my contact information. I'm the green ones here on top on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you haven't had enough of sawfish already and want to learn more, I have a monthly newsletter that goes out that updates on all the shark, ray, and sawfish research projects that we do here in Tampa Bay. You can go to my website, havenworth.org, and sign up for that newsletter. And here is my phone number and my email. If you have any more burning sawfish questions, then you can contact me with that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joan to start the Q&A and answer.
Wow. That was fantastic. Thank you, Tonya. We had some great observations. A lot of the audience agreed with you, Tonya, that baby sawfish are actually so cute. And those videos were really neat. That drone footage is that was awesome. That was fun to see. So let's see. There is a question here on the lifespan, which I think you touched on, and then plans for nurseries. Any ideas on their lifespan and then plans for nurseries?
No, they live longer than our research. So our research is only 22 years old on sawfish. The sawfish that are at SeaWorld in Orlando have been there since the 80s. We can't always compare what happens in an aquarium to what happens in the real world, but those guys have been there for now 40 years. There was a sawfish in another aquarium that was in that facility for about 60 years. And we recently had a 16-year recapture of one of our animals. So it was tagged, and this was in the Bahamas. It was tagged in the Bahamas and recaptured in the Bahamas, but that was 16 years later. So we really don't know. Probably several decades, but we really don't know at this point exactly how long they live.
The research is still in its infancy, right?
In its infancy. And
I mean,
one of the ways usually that we would age sharks and rays is through their vertebrae. So just like trees lay down growth rings, sharks do that in their vertebrae. So normally, if we wanted to age an animal, we can sacrifice some from the population, get their vertebrae, count the rings that are laid down in their vertebrae, and age them. Well, sawfish are endangered, so obviously we're not going to sacrifice any of those animals to get to their vertebrae. So we're having to go about alternative means of answering these questions. We have been able to retrieve some carcasses that like washed up in the Keys, or when we had that really bad winter, 2010, I think it was, we had the really bad freeze that killed a lot of snook even up in this area. Several sawfish washed up dead, and we were able to get those carcasses. So we're able to get those vertebrae out of those and are starting to count and maybe get an idea of that. But yeah, right now we really have no idea how long they live.
So important that you're doing this research. There were several comments regarding the postcards and the pictures that you showed at the beginning with regard to how large those were, and somebody was wondering whether they were fake or real.
Definitely real. We have those same photographs from around the world of all the different species. There's actually a species of sawfish that gets bigger than our sawfish. So there's some from other places of 25 feet sawfish. So I mean, they were quite big. Yeah, and it's astonishing to see them, you know, especially when you have the humans in the picture to give it scale. But I've seen some, you know, 15 feet sawfish down in the Florida Keys, and it's amazing how they look bigger than they are. Even you look at it, you're like, God, that thing's got to be 20 feet, and then you measure it, it's only 15. But because they're so wide, also, you know, they get wider as they get bigger. But yep, absolutely they're real. Absolutely they're real. You know, we have the sawfish rostra in museums like the Smithsonian. And one picture I showed you of my 3 colleagues with the sawfish rostra that were getting DNA from them. We have isolated rostra that are, you know, 6 feet long. So when you do that math out, you know, we know how big sawfish were.
Just amazing. And then when you get a confirmed sighting, you go out and capture and try to tag those animals. You described that. That was one of the questions.
And we have responders around the state that can do that. So, you know, if you're in Jacksonville and you see one, we have partners up there, really, you know, all around the Gulf, but it's only happening in Florida right now. But we have people who will respond to encounter anywhere in the state. And like I said, try to hedge our bets. You know, if someone just saw one somewhere recently, then it at least gives us a little bit of a head start in trying to find this endangered species. So yeah, somebody will respond pretty quickly to try to go catch it and tag it.
Fantastic. That's a good point, that it doesn't, it can be anywhere in the state. So keep your eyes peeled. This is interesting, and it may have been generated by that really cool videos that you showed us of the sawfish eating, capturing and eating their prey. The question from Annette is, do sawfish have sensory organs in the saw?
Excellent question. And yes, they do. So you might be familiar with like the sensory pores on the snout of a shark. They're called ampullae of Lorenzini. A very similar thing is on the sawfish. So let me get out of the way here a little bit so you can see this. But on the underside of the saw here, that is lined with these sensory pores. And this is actually hollow, the saw. There's 2 canals that are fluid filled that run the entire length of the saw that connect to the brain case. So they kind of use the saw kind of like a metal detector. So, they'll sit on the bottom, the current's flowing this way, and they can detect, a fish swims over here, the sawfish is going to detect it and swipe that saw to hit that. So yes, they've got the sensory pores all along the underside here that they can detect that, which is quite fascinating. Yeah. Great question.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Oh, and Justin wants to know, where do we get that sawfish sticker?
Oh, you can send me an email, Tonya@havenworth.org, and I will send you a swag pack. I've got stickers, I've got floating keychains, I've got sunglass straps. I've got all kinds of goodies. So drop me an email and with your mailing address, and I'll get a goodie bag out for you. Got pens,
Fantastic.
pencils, all kinds of cool stuff.
Tonya treated us well here, so for as long as they last, we have some cool stickers and goodies here at Weeden Island Preserve. So come on inside and talk to one of the docents at the front desk here, and we'll hook you up that way too. Let's see. Annette also suggests you might see if you can put a rack with some cards at Clearwater Marine Aquarium.
Oh, excellent. I will do that.
Yeah. And then, and this is an Alexa was wondering, are these the only rays with elongated rostra? They seem pretty special. I'm wondering about their ancestry and close relatives.
It is crazy. Yeah, we have several prehistoric versions of that, also ancestries of them. The most closely related thing to them now is the saw shark, which, very similar morphology, much smaller body. They're in deeper water, also have that elongated saw, but have the gill slits on the side. That's what's most closely related. But yeah, historically, there were several different variations of sawfish type animals that are pretty fascinating to see them, that were, quite substantial in size also.
Thank you guys for being so engaged. Our audience members are always so into it. We've gotten a bunch of thank yous already, but don't drop off. If it's okay with you, Tonya, let's launch into our little get to know you a little bit more and pick your brain a little bit more if you're up to it.
I'm up for it. Yeah.
Okay. And now it's going to be Tonya and me. Okay. First off, again, remarkable work that you're doing, and it's just amazing. The education, the outreach, the coordination with partners. It's good to know that we have other organizations locally and throughout the state that are able to collaborate with you and what you do, to a point that we may have some young scientists or students that may be forming their career thoughts and career paths. Would you speak to us about what they should think about as they make those decisions? And do you have any words of wisdom for students looking at marine science as a career?
A very good question. And I would say, get as much experience as you can in as many different fields as possible. So, you may focus in on what species you want to work in or what geographic area you want to work in, but don't limit yourself to that for getting the experience. So, for example, I went to Oregon and worked on freshwater fish in a mountain for a summer just to get experience, but that's where I really got my certification for boating, and I learned a lot of scientific methods, in person. So get as much experience as you can, whether that's going to be through, paid summer internships or seasonal jobs, or, if you're home for winter break and can get a temporary job working somewhere, that's going to acquire you skills that are going to be applicable to any scientific field. And it's also going to help you make contacts with people, which is honestly really important. When you apply for a job, having the contacts of people who can vouch for you and be your references is also very big. So, learn as much as you can about what it is you want to do, but don't don't limit your experience gathering to just that field. Diversify yourself, get as many skills as you can in as many different ways as you can.
That's great advice, Tonya. And a lot of that applies also to volunteering for those of you who may be past student age, but still want to get involved. Find something that you like Tonya said, and start broad and kind of go from there. But there are a lot of ways to get involved. So taking that idea a little bit further and trying to understand kind of where your career took a turn to sawfish, Tonya, can you help us understand kind of what how you came to focus then on sawfish from this much broader picture?
Sure. Well, sawfish were never actually on my radar. I grew up in Michigan, but in North Florida, Fort Worth, Texas, North Texas, Fort Worth, not Florida. I've been in Florida so long now, but I was far from saltwater, but I always wanted to work on sharks. I was fascinated by sharks. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on sharks. Sawfish were not at all on my radar. I was from Texas. We didn't have sawfish there. I don't think I even learned about sawfish during my degree in marine fisheries, So I had interviewed for a job at Mote Marine Lab down in Sarasota for a shark job. Thought for sure I was going to get that job because I thought, man, who likes sharks more than me? Nobody. But I did not get that job. But apparently I left a good enough impression for that job that a few months later, an opportunity came up to start this sawfish project. So I got a call from them saying, you had interviewed for this shark job, but we would really like to offer you this job on sawfish. And I said, oh my gosh, thank you, but I don't know anything about sawfish. I would love to, but I don't think I'm the right person because I don't know anything about sawfish. And they said, well, nobody knows anything about sawfish. We haven't had research done on them in the United States. So we need someone to come over here and start and run a field program. And I said, well, I am the right person for that. So, my career goal has always been to be the person on the boat, doing the fishing, doing the tagging, collecting the data, not the person in the office. So I knew I was going to be perfect for that. And so that's when I packed up and I moved from Houston to here and spent my next several years in the library going through all the, the archives, developing those maps, just trying to learn how to catch a sawfish, talking to fishermen about how they were catching sawfish, when and where they were catching sawfish, what they were using for bait, because I had no idea how to go catch one, where it would be. Is it gonna, I never would have thought that a baby sawfish would be right up in the mangrove prop roots. That never would have crossed my mind. So I spent the good first many months just learning how to do my job. And now it's part of me. Now I can't imagine doing, I've been working on sawfish now for 22 years, and I just can't imagine not ever working on sawfish now. It's so fascinating. I love it because everything I learn is important to saving these critters. I want to save them. So I absolutely love it. Yeah, but was not my career goal when I started.
That is a great story. That is an amazing journey. And you're talking about, starting research on a creature from the ground up, right? In the early 2000s, right? So this is before the internet. This is, or not before the internet, but the internet was kind of a baby back then. Yep. So you literally had to go in and those pictures that you showed us at the beginning of your presentation.
Yeah.
Were some of those from your initial,
Yes, they were. So I spent time, those of you remember time before the internet, remember microfish at the library. This is what I did. This was before the internet, which was largely available and before it was, exploded with all the information it has now. So I was in the library, researching, finding all these things, talking with other libraries, having them photograph copies of things and mail them to me, old school, in the mail. And so, I mean, that's part of why it took so long was how we used to have to do research the old fashioned way. But yes, that's how I came up with so many of those old photographs, was through that work where, our original question was, are sawfish endangered? Should they be listed as endangered? When NOAA Fisheries received the petition in 2000 to list them, our first question to answer was, should sawfish be listed as endangered? So because there wasn't the scientific literature to refer to, the first thing we had to do was find, okay, well, let's find out where sawfish used to be. Let's find out where they are now. Let's start with that. So we found all those photographs, put the yellow dots on the map of where they used to be, and then looked at where they are now. Like, wow, they used to be from Texas to Florida to North Carolina. Now they're from Naples to Key Largo. Yeah, I'd say that's endangered, So yeah, that's what we did for the first part of the project, focusing on that. And that was old school in the library before the internet. I spent a lot of my time in the Everglades at the beginning of this, first 10 years of the project. That was before we had cell phones even, we had cell phones, but they didn't really work in the Everglades. And so I was using the old school NOAA weather radio to get my weather forecast when I was down in the Everglades on a houseboat for a week. GPS maps weren't what they were now. So I was using a folding paper map to navigate my way around the Everglades. Took a hardy soul to do it, but I was a hardy soul and I loved my job back then. So, I didn't know any different back then either, but yeah, it was. And even our tracking technology for the tags, this new transmitter and receiver technology that's been developed, I couldn't have imagined this 20 years ago when we started this, and now we're getting, these tags last 10 years. So we catch a juvenile sawfish, we can track it, until it reaches sexual maturity and get some really good long-term movement and habitat use data from these. So technology has come a long way, thankfully, for helping us to learn about these animals in our research. And even like this, 20 years ago, we never would be able to give a presentation to people who really can be anywhere. I guess this is one of the good things that's going to come out of COVID lockdown, is that we all learned how to give presentations on Zoom, where we used to always do them in person, which I do miss. I'm looking forward to doing this in person again. But I'm able to reach a lot more people because people can sit in their office or at their house and watch this, and don't have to drive somewhere to see it. So that's another way technology has definitely helped our research and our outreach efforts to help manage the species.
Absolutely. And, it takes, your passion is obvious, and the fact that you love the field biology aspect of it makes me wonder, I got to ask you this. So all the hours and all the days and all the time that you've spent out on the water, and out in the field, what's the most unusual thing you've ever seen?
Oh my gosh. Wow, there's so much that I love about being on the boat. Like, being on the boat when the sun rises, to me, is just one of the most awe-inspiring, energizing things. So, we always leave the dock before sunrise so that we're fishing at sunrise. I love that. But probably the thing that I'm going to remember most from my career, in 40 years, if I make it that long, is going to be when I was in the Everglades. I was in Ponce de Leon Bay, which is by far my favorite place to fish. Ponce de Leon Bay in Everglades National Park has everything you could ever imagine catching down there. I love that place. We were down there fishing for sawfish and got to watch a very large great hammerhead chase and eat a tarpon pretty much right next to our boat. It was awe-inspiring. It was mesmerizing. We all just stopped what we were doing and just sat and watched nature at work. And, this large, great hammerhead chasing this tarpon next to us, and then eating it was amazing. It was amazing.
Wow. Wow. That's a great answer. You just never know what you're going to see out there, right?
Right. Yep.
So speaking to our audience specifically for the Why It Matters series, we like to let the viewers know what they can do to make a difference. And you included a lot of great things in your presentation regarding that. But if there's any in terms of reporting a sighting and the research that you're doing in these different organizations that are collaborating with you that people could also contact and potentially get involved with. In terms of conservation and stewardship, what would you like the takeaway message to the audience today to be?
I think that, I don't know how many people were here, 25, 30 people, but that's 30 more people now that know that we have sawfish in Tampa Bay. And they're going to go home and they're going to talk to their spouse or their friend or their coworkers and be like, oh my gosh, do you know we have this thing in Tampa Bay? And here's what you do if you catch one when you're out tarpon fishing. You might catch one, here's what to do. So the grassroots efforts from this presentation going out to these 30 people and then who they're going to talk to and who they're going to talk to and help spread the word that we have sawfish, that they're endangered, that they need to be released if you catch one. We're not really going to see them diving over here because we don't get a lot of diving over here unless you go offshore. You might see one offshore. But particularly the handling and release guidelines, and just sharing those with people. If you fish, if you have somebody that fishes, be like, man, I just went to this awesome talk. I've learned about we have sawfish in Tampa Bay, right. And hopefully we're going to start seeing them in Tampa Bay more as recovery happens. More and more people should start encountering sawfish, seeing them when they're fishing, or catching them when they're fishing, or walking along their seawall or over a bridge or on a pier, looking down and seeing one. Hopefully that's going to happen more often. And so for people to know, if they hear somebody say that, they'll be like, oh, did you call that in to sawfishrecovery.org or 1-800-44-SAWFISH, so that everyone knows how they can help our research. And then of course, I always have to put in the plug for donating. If you want to donate to help our research so we can continue that, that always helps obviously as well. But yeah, just helping spread the word that we have this amazingly unique animal here, and let scientists know if you catch one.
Thanks, Tonya. So speaking about spreading the word, October 17th, everybody mark your calendar, is International Sawfish Day. And you alluded to an activity that you do and hopefully will be able to do in 2022. So that's right around October 17th, 2022, right?
Yeah.
And what would that be?
Yes. So normally International Sawfish Day, October 17th, falls right around the same time that we have the St. Pete Science Festival, which is held in conjunction with Marine Quest every year in downtown St. Pete. So usually I have a sawfish booth there. I have a replica sawfish that's about 3 feet long. I have some real sawfish rostra that you can, hold and feel and look at and see those sensory pores on the underside. Of course, I give away sawfish swag to everybody who wants it with the, handling guidelines and reporting information. So normally I have a booth at the St. Pete Science Festival. Of course, the last 2 years, unfortunately, that's had to go virtual. But hopefully in 2022, we will have that back in person again. And I will have my sawfish information booth there so you can come by and see me. I'm hoping to have a booth at the St. Pete Tampa Boat Show that's coming up in January. It's going to be in downtown St. Petersburg, the boat show. I think everybody's travel restrictions for work are going to be lifted by January. So I should actually have enough people to help me man the booth. Which has been difficult the last year, as you imagine. But hopefully we'll have our sawfish exhibit at the St. Pete Tampa Boat Show in St. Petersburg in January. So come by and see me there too. We can talk about sawfish. Obviously, I can talk about sawfish for hours. But again, like I said, you can see the replica sawfish I have and feel some real sawfish stalls. I have one for a newborn size and one from a full-grown size. You can see real ones in person as well.
Sounds great. All right. So we've got it on our calendar, October 17th, and also look in January. for in the St. Pete area for the boat show, you too can meet Tonya Wiley in person and get the sensory end of the sawfish parts. So it's kind of funny that you really wanted to study sharks and were bummed out when you didn't get the shark job first. So let's talk a little bit about Tonya and sharks. So how old were you when you saw your first shark?
Oh, I was in second grade, so I guess I was about 7. We were living in Michigan at the time, but we were down in Florida visiting family on vacation. My dad and I were fishing in Charlotte Harbor, just south of here, and we caught a whole bunch of sharp-nosed sharks and black-nosed sharks, bull sharks. We saw, oh my gosh, I remember seeing a great hammerhead swim by. We saw manatees and dolphins and pelicans, and I was overwhelmed and enamored. Like, people don't believe me when I say this, but the time that I spent in Charlotte Harbor fishing with my dad on that vacation, I enjoyed more than when we went to Israel. That part of my family vacation, I love this. This is what I want to spend all of my free time fishing and being outside and being on a boat and watching all the birds and the fish and everything swim by. It was awesome. So second grade, family vacation to Florida is what hooked me.
Yeah, you were marked, man. Your career had started happening already and you didn't even know it.
Right?
All right, so then what's your favorite species of shark or ray?
Well, ray is obviously the sawfish, but that's a given. But my favorite species of shark, I would say, is actually the bull shark. I'm going to be specific here and say newborn baby bull sharks. They are so cute, but they're very brightly and brilliantly colored when they're newborn size before they kind of dull out to be all gray. Surprisingly, they're very colorful when they're young. And, luckily with the shark project that I have going on down here in Lower Tampa Bay, a couple years ago, we actually discovered a bull shark nursery in the Manatee River that we've been doing some research on for the past few years. So I'm very happy that I am also able to do some research on my favorite shark locally here, right from home. And so, yeah, baby bull sharks is definitely my favorite.
Super cool. I'm gonna have to look them up. Juveniles or newborns and see the
Yes.
colors. That's a fun fact. All right, well, let us close with this question on your work, your research. What is the best part of what you do, and what about what you do would you say would be the most challenging aspect of studying and researching the sawfish and shark?
I'll start with the most challenging, which for working here on a boat in Florida is definitely the weather conditions. Every day is something different, whether it's mosquitoes or no-see-ums, or of course in the summer we have to deal with the thunderstorms, the daily thunderstorms. Another reason why we leave before sunrise, because we want to get in our full days of work before our afternoon thunderstorms start. But dealing with tides and just all the different things that as the captain of the boat, I'm responsible for the crew safety. So my mind is always on tide and weather and watching the sky and the heat and making sure everyone stays hydrated, and so there's all the logistics that go into crew safety. It's very important, but yeah, probably is my least favorite part of the job. But that kind of leads into which is my favorite part of the job, which is I get to spend most of my time on a boat outside in nature, interacting with nature, and everything that I learn, especially when it comes to sawfish, is important. It's critical to help managing them, critical to help recovering them. So I love all the different people I get to work with. I've got to work on a whole lot of different species. I mentioned earlier, one of my first jobs out of college was in Oregon. I took a temporary summer job working for the US Geological Survey inventorying a lake of their freshwater fish, which, no offense to freshwater fish, as a saltwater person, is pretty boring. And way too cold. So I learned very quickly that I need to work in a southern location because I don't like the cold. And I need to work in saltwater because, yeah. But I learned a lot on that job. I still, I mean, that was almost 30 years ago and I still remember it. But, that's definitely my favorite thing, is that I've gotten to go a lot of different places, work with a lot of different people, but my job, my office is my boat and nature, and I love that.
Well, Tonya, you are a fascinating individual, and I so appreciate you giving us your time today and your expertise. And you guys out there, don't forget to get in touch with Tonya. She's got a killer newsletter. Go to tonya@havenworth.org. It's right there on your screen, and sign up for the newsletter. Appreciate you joining us for today's program. I want to thank our friends group here at the Friends of Weeden Island. They are responsible for funding our educational programs, and as such, cool things like Why It Matters with cool people like Tonya Wiley. So thanks to the Friends group, and thank you, Tonya. You have been a wonderful inspiration for us all today in so many ways, and really, really appreciate the work that you do. Keep it up, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, till next time.
Till next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.